Aaron Boone wants T.O. get fired after another loss. Post-game interview, Astros 5-3 Yankees.
I need that little brain-dead clown, Aaron Boone, to please pack his bags and get the hell out of this team before I give him these hands. Just a horrible manager with the brain size of an ant.
The stadium lights felt louder than usual that night, like they were trying to drown out the small, steady drumbeat of worry that had been building all season. The scoreboard finally read Astros 5, Yankees 3, but the numbers alone did not tell the whole story. It took 10 innings, a stretch of baseball that stretched thin the patience of the crowd and the confidence of a team that had hoped for steadier footing. The loss landed like a weight on Aaron Boone's shoulders, not because it was the only defeat, but because of how it happened. In the extra frames, with a reliever who had been struggling for weeks handed the ball in the most delicate moment. The play-by-play boxed the headlines, but the feeling in the clubhouse afterward was the kind of ache that comes when people who believe in a plan watch that plan unravel in a single breath. Boone walked into the post-game scrum with the practiced calm of a man whose job hinges on how he handles both wins and losses. Reporters crowded close, microphones angled, cameras rolling, and that air of urgency made every sentence count more than usual.
I am done here, guys. I am announcing my retirement from managing, and I will be resigning from the Yankees effective immediately because that had to be one of the worst losses ever in baseball history.
Boone spoke in measured tones. He accepted responsibility as the manager, but he also explained why he turned to the reliever he did. He pointed to recent history, to the veteran's past success, and to the fact that sometimes managers must trust names and track records when the moment arrives. For fans watching at home, those answers felt familiar. For the commentators on the air, they were the same lines that managers give in the face of hard luck. For many in the stands and watching online, however, it wasn't the words that mattered so much as the image. Boone's steady in public and carrying the storm in private.
As you popped out with bases loaded and showed everyone your unclutched gene once again, and I placed a live trade on Kelce when you were up 3-0 and you sold my trade, you little trash can. Go buy yourself a clutch gene before we throw hands.
The reliever at the heart of the debate said what a lot of people already suspected. After the game, he admitted the struggle in blunt, raw terms. "I stink right now." That sentence cut through the usual managerial talk. It was a short, honest confession that made the tactical debate feel human. The reliever had been a star in the past, someone who once seemed untouchable in late innings, but the last several outings had not matched up with the reputation. His pitches were missing their spots, his confidence had dipped, and the outcomes started to stack up into a pattern. When a pitcher says he is not making pitches, managers are forced into difficult choices about whether to ride with experience or pivot to form. On that night, Boone chose to trust the name and the veteran. The result did not favor that choice. Outside the narrow circle of the dugout and the press pen, the reaction was immediate and loud. Clips of the final inning ballooned across social platforms within minutes, edited into short, sharp videos with big, angry captions. An image of a tired manager, a replay of a mislocated pitch, and a soundbite of surrender were all the fuel the crowd needed to light up their outrage. From message boards to talk radio, one refrain came up with steady force: the manager had to be held accountable. Fans typed furiously behind glowing screens, calling for change, and some voices even pushed the dramatic claim that the manager was inviting his own firing with his decisions. Online, that kind of heat spreads fast. It grows in size and in volume until it can feel like a roar that drowns out nuance. Inside the clubhouse, the mood was quieter. Players moved with the tiredness of people who had given what they could and still came up short. Some met in small groups to sort through what had happened. Others sat alone, earbuds in, staring at their gloves. Boone's presence there mattered in ways that went beyond the press conference. Managers influence how a team recovers from loss, not only by making roster moves, but by how they convey belief and by the steadiness of their voice. Boone's task was to balance ownership's long-term plan with the team's immediate need for results. His answers had to restore trust while also signaling a path forward. And that is a narrow line to walk on nights when anger floods the stands and patience runs low. When pundits rewound the tape in slow motion, they fixed on a handful of key images: the pitch that left the plate late, the swing that found a hole, and the face of a man who looked like he had the same questions everyone else had. Analysts across networks debated whether Boone had alternatives. Some argued that the bullpen was thin and that choices earlier in the game limited his options in the 10th inning. Others said the recent form of that reliever was evidence enough that the manager should have moved on. Those are the kinds of debates that make for good television. Clear questions easy to parse from the comfort of a broadcast booth. Yet in practice, managers deal with lists of history, matchups, and the intangible chemistry of confidence. And sometimes the decision that looks wrong on a highlight reel had a logic behind it the camera never shows. The public court of opinion is faster and harsher than internal evaluations, and that speed reshapes careers. One moment the manager is a steady hand. The next he is the target of viral hashtags and animated segments. Ownership teams watch both the record and the headlines because the two influence each other. A streak of bad results creates noise that can become a story of institutional failure, and once a narrative forms, it is hard to undo. Still, executives typically dive deeper than a single ugly inning. They look at roster construction, injuries, performance trends, and whether a manager's style fits the identity the front office wants to build. On paper, a rash decision like firing a manager mid-season brings its own risks: instability, the need to find a replacement who can step in immediately, and a signal that the organization may be reactive rather than thoughtful. That calculus matters when fans demand immediate action. There is also a human element that is often overlooked in the rush to judge: the idea that trust is earned over time, and that breaking that trust is not a single event. Boone had built a track record with the team. He had led them through seasons that included deep postseason runs, and that history buys a manager more than one night can take away. Fans do not always see the full ledger of games, the wins that cemented faith, and the soft moments where a manager's calm restored a club's momentum. But in the era of instant clips and hot takes, those longer narratives struggle to get equal airtime. The balance between remembering history and responding to immediate failure is a tension every franchise manages differently. For some, patience is the policy. For others, a single collapse is the beginning of the end. The reliever's struggle had not started with this game. It had been a trend, a slow slide from reliability to doubt. For a pitcher who once closed games with confidence, the past few appearances had included missed spots and a drop in feel. When a player himself admits a loss of command, the manager's choices become less about loyalty and more about risk management. Boone's decision to use him in the 10th frame carried the weight of that history and of the matchup specifics: lefty-righty splits, who was on base, and who had already taxed the bullpen earlier that night. Critics made the decision look simple: trust an established arm or switch, but managers work under time constraints and a pile of numbers that rarely make a clear answer. The real cost of a wrong move can be a single headline and an avalanche of online anger. Fans are not monolithic. Among the crowd, there were those who wanted immediate change and those who pleaded for calm. Some longtime followers saw a pattern they believed was leading the team off course. They wanted a hard reset. Others recognized the long season's tendencies, the inevitability of slumps, and a need for a plan that considered injuries, thrown arms, and the difficulty of replacing veteran presence. Those opposing instincts, react now versus plan slow, are what make fan debates so noisy and so deeply felt. Every loss accelerates the argument on one side and deepens the desire for patience on the other. Baseball, with its 162 games and thin margins, often magnifies this kind of polarization. In the days after the loss, a few off-field storylines added color to the debate. A Hall of Fame figure who often visits the ballpark around old-timers events was reported planning to speak with a struggling reliever, a move that read like a veteran lending support to a younger player wrestling with form. That kind of mentorship matters. It is not an immediate fix, but it can be a turning point in a player's mindset. Stories like that remind observers that baseball contains human interventions beyond box scores, conversations in hallways, quiet words from legends, and the mental work that helps an athlete reset. Whether mentorship changes outcomes is uncertain, but it matters to the narrative because it shows the organization trying to help, not just criticize. Across sports radio and talk shows, the language turned dramatic. Clips were looped into narratives about managerial failure, season collapse, and front office indecision. Some hosts were fiery, calling for an immediate managerial change. Others argued that the problem ran deeper. The roster had weaknesses, injuries had taken a toll, and perhaps the front office needed to recalibrate its priorities. The reality was somewhere between those extremes. Managers can only do so much with the men on the roster. Building a stable, deep bullpen is as much a job of the general manager as it is of the skipper. Still, when the game ends on a pitcher's missed pitch, the manager's choices are the most visible and thus the easiest target for anger. Players, for their part, have to compartmentalize. They spend hours with one another, practicing, traveling, and living in the same rhythm. That closeness creates a need for unity in the face of public scorn. Some players publicly defended Boone, noting that he was doing the job the organization expected and that his approach did not change in the heat of late innings. Other players, particularly those younger or sitting on the bench, might quietly hope for clearer signals and quicker hooks when a reliever showed visible signs of trouble. The internal conversation in the clubhouse is private, but it often reveals a lot about whether trust in a manager is solid or fraying. Boone's task was never just to lead plays on the field. It was also to maintain that internal trust, which can be the difference between a resilient team and one that cracks in trouble. The mathematics of the season also mattered. A single loss does not usually alter the trajectory of a 40-person roster playing a long schedule, but the timing of losses can increase pressure. Extra inning defeats feel especially painful because they often follow a tie and the team's best effort to win in regulation. Each game is a piece of a much larger puzzle, a wild card race, division lead, or a playoff push. And losing close games slowly drains the bank of confidence a team needs to succeed in September. The front office watches trends, blown saves, declining bullpen ERA, and how the team performs in one-run games. Those metrics, more than headlines, often drive decisions in trade season and front office strategy. But the public rarely gets those inside numbers. They see the replay and decide. Boone's own future depends on more than online fury. The front office has to consider a broader set of data, how the roster was built, the team's injury report, the remaining schedule, and whether the manager's approach is in line with the organization's identity. If ownership believes the manager is the right person to steady the ship, they will look for roster moves and coaching tweaks to fix the problems. If they believe the manager's choices are making the situation worse, they may act. But those changes are not simple. Finding a new manager mid-season can unsettle a clubhouse and complicate trade plans. So while the call for firing is loud, the decision sits in a private room where many factors weigh heavily. When the cameras left and the stadium emptied, the small details of the night stayed with those who lived it. A veteran player walked slowly toward the dugout, hat low. A pair of bench players exchanged words about what pitch to throw in practice the next day. Coaches pored over data on a tablet, replaying sequences and looking for patterns. Boone retreated to his office and considered the next steps, how to reshuffle the bullpen usage, who might be given lower leverage innings to rebuild confidence, and whether a trade or a call-up could fill the gap. The work of fixing a team is the kind of slow, methodical labor that fans rarely see between the flash of scores and the rush of opinion. It is not dramatic, it is practical, detailed, and necessary. Yet the spectacle of sports means some nights get remembered more vividly than others. This extra inning loss would be replayed on highlight reels, stitched into clips with dramatic music, and used as proof by those who believed the change was overdue. For Boone, every appearance after that would come with a sharper edge. Commentators would look for signs of adaptation, and the patience of some fans would run thinner. The manager's job thus became an exercise in steady responses, public accountability, private fixes, and visible attention to the issues at hand. If the bullpen regained form and the team started to win close games, the outrage would settle back into the background hum of sports chatter. If the struggles continued, the story would harden into a narrative of decline. The game's final box score would show only numbers, a 5-3 result in 10 innings, a blown save, and a series of hits that decided the night. But for people inside and outside the clubhouse, the loss meant more. It exposed fault lines in confidence, in roster construction, and in the public's tolerance for failure. It demonstrated how quickly social media can compress weeks of issues into a single moment of outrage. And it reminded everyone that managers, no matter how experienced, live on a thin margin between staying and being replaced. The next days would reveal whether the team could pick itself up, whether the reliever could find a reset, and whether Boone's steady words would translate into steady results. Baseball moves on. The team would take the field again, with training routine and pre-game chatter filling the clubhouse. The manager would make more decisions, some wise and some criticized. The bullpen would be adjusted, perhaps with veterans given lower pressure innings and younger arms tested for resilience. The front office might quietly explore trade options or look to minor league depth to shore up shaky areas. The fan base, as always, would split between those calling for instant change and those willing to trust a longer plan. For Aaron Boone, the night remained a marker, an instance when a decision and its result became louder than usual. Whether it would become a turning point or a footnote depended on the small things that make up baseball, one pitch, one practice, one conversation at a time. In the end, Boone's story that season would hinge on what came next. If the bullpen found form, if the veterans rediscovered their command, and if the team started to win the close games that had slipped away, the calls for immediate change would fade into the background. If struggles became a pattern and the loudest voices of the fan base grew more insistent, the front office would face real pressure to act. For now, though, the night was a snapshot, a manager defending a call, a pitcher owning his struggles, and a fan base debating what comes first, accountability or patience. Baseball is a long, stubborn season that forgives some things and never forgives others. Boone and the Yankees would learn which kind this night would become by the simple measure baseball uses: results. One game at a time, with all the noise and nuance that comes with being a big league club, the story would unfold. This narrative was not an end, but a moment of reckoning. It captured how modern sports compress human weakness into viral clips, how management choices are both tactical and symbolic, and how fans, players, and officials all carry parts of the responsibility for a team's fate. On a scoreboard, the numbers were simple. In the hearts of those involved, the loss was a call to action, to fix, to learn, and to move forward. The rest of the season would show whether that call would be answered in the dugout, in the front office, or in the quiet, steady work of players and coaches who are paid to make the improbable happen. For Aaron Boone, the night would remain a question mark, one that only the following games could fill with answers. In quiet days after a loss, the work becomes routine and essential. Coaches meet with pitchers, batters, and support staff to correct small mistakes and plan adjustments. Young players earn minutes in less tense moments to build confidence and trust. Fans will argue loudly, but actual repair happens behind the scenes through disciplined communication, careful practice, and gradual recovery built one day at a time steadily.